Welcome everybody, kia ora koutou, ko Ngāti Pākehā tōku iwi no kirikiri roa aho, ko Bridget Doran tōku ingoa. This is the 6th, I think, or 7th, I lost track, conversation in my Cheers Conversation series for Engineering New Zealand's Transportation Group. Our group is a collection of transport planners, engineers, and any other professionals with an interest in professional transport planning and practice in New Zealand. And I started this series last year to explore some of the questions about why we don't get better outcomes from transport investment in New Zealand, what some of our priorities should be, and what some of the reasons might be that we don't deliver on them a lot of the time. And today I am delighted to be joined by Alice Davies, and Alice will tell us about herself in a moment. She was the inaugural Transportation Group sponsored intern, and Alice spent some of her summer working at Beca in Tauranga. So we're going to talk about that and some other insights that Alice has gleaned from her time working in transport practice. So welcome, Alice. Thank you very much for joining us. Could you please just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're studying?
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm Alice, and I'm currently studying a Bachelor of Social Work at Waikato University in Tauranga. So I'm in my 3rd year out of 4. Yeah.
Cool, awesome. So you're studying social work, and some people listening might think that that's not necessarily traditionally related to transport. So what interested you in applying for the Transportation Group internship?
Yeah, I guess it's not a typical kind of transport route to go, but yeah, I think I was interested in the internship because they were looking for students with experience with disabilities. So I kind of saw, hey, these people are interested in disability and accessibility and that kind of thing. So I thought I'd kind of shoot my shot and put in my application. And one of the things like Bridget asked for was to put in a research kind of proposal. So I said, well, I would want to look at it from kind of like a social work perspective of how transport is for the disabled community and how accessibility is or inaccessibility is negatively affecting them.
Yeah, that's really cool. And so in Alice's application, what I liked about it was that you were very articulate about talking about how social policy absolutely has links with transport, and transport challenges come up a lot in social policy and in social work, because if people can't get somewhere, then that affects all parts of their lives. Of course it does. So one of the criteria that we had for the internship was that we wanted people who identify as disabled to apply, because we recognise that not many members of the transportation group identify as disabled people. We ran a survey a few years ago, and it was about 2% of the people who responded identified as disabled, compared to about 24-25% in the population. So that's really low and underrepresented. So how does transport accessibility affect your life as a disabled person? Can you tell us some examples of transport barriers, or what might make it difficult for you to get around sometimes?
Yeah, so I've had quite a kind of journey with my health, and times where I've been, better and worse. So I'd say at the moment I'm on a pretty good place with it, but there were like a few years there where I really struggled with mobility and energy and things like that. So for example, there was a year around when I was 18, I was on the disability benefit. So obviously a bus is, a very affordable way to get around. So I think that really helps people with that have disabilities that can't work. And I think another thing that was beneficial when it was there was seating. I think in the peak of me being really sick, I needed to take breaks from walking a lot. So if I was to wait for a bus and there was no seating, it would have been really hard. It would have caused me a lot of pain to kind of be enduring just to stand for too long of a time. Yeah.
And so did you did you know in advance which bus stops had seats? Like, did you have preferred bus stops to use, or places where you thought, oh yeah, I could go to that place because I know that I'd be able to sit down in between? Did you kind of work out the bus system like that?
Yeah, I think so. And I also knew like the bus stops around my area, like, oh, it's probably easier for me to get to this one, which might be a little bit further away, but near my house at the time, it was going on to a highway and there's no footpath or crossing to get to the other side. It's just a pole in the grass, right next to
Yeah,
the highway. So
yeah,
it was a bit of, a challenge. And so I had to kind of think about those things. But yeah, seating was really helpful and I knew which ones had the seats.
yeah. I'll just remind our attendees that there is a Q&A. If you've got any questions or comments you'd like to discuss, we're going to have a conversation with you all at the end of my list of questions. So feel free to type any comments or questions in the Q&A box. It'd be great to have a big bunch of questions that we can talk about. So, okay, so you identify as a disabled person, Alice, and you're a social work student in Tauranga. Let's talk about your internship and what did you get up to while you were at Beca?
Cool. Yeah. So my internship, I had a really good time to sum it up. I was hosted at Beca in Tauranga, and I think I was really surprised about how well it went. I think I did kind of think, oh, how would this engineering company take a social work student, and how would that work, or like, what's it going to be like to be like, oh, I'm disabled, but I don't look it anymore because I don't use the wheelchair anymore, but and see how people would react. But I think I had a really good experience and everyone was really open to hearing my ideas and my experience, and seemed like all the interns that were in the transport kind of sector at Beca said the same things, like they thought that they might just go fetch someone coffee or something like that, but then they ended up being able to really collaborate with other people in the company and have that communication with those higher up, which I think really helps because they made room to let employees make goals and career like future goals and things like that. So they're just really encouraging, and no one thought anything bad about my experience. It was just like, cool, here's a girl with a new perspective, and they're all really welcoming. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. So how was social work or social kind of policy, did that come up at all in your work? Did you have a chance to bring in anything from your studies into what you were doing?
Yeah, I mean, to sum up what I kind of was doing day to day, I was doing my research project, and then I was also just working within their transport team with their projects and things like that. So a lot of what I did was, researching what guidelines were out there for people with disabilities, and what does the government have in place. So a lot of that is social policy because you're dealing with a social group. And then a lot of what I was doing as well was just talking about the disabled community and what it looks like in the Bay of Plenty, and what kind of disabilities or like illnesses or impairments are labeled as a disability. So that, in a kind of a social policy sense, I was just, advocating, being like, here's the numbers of this social group and here's how, prominent it is in our community.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you think maybe those numbers and just some understanding of the social landscape would help people who are in traditional engineering or transport training, like planners and engineers, to maybe learn some of that, to learn about disability and their degrees as well. Do you think that'd be useful?
Yeah, and I think it's good to kind of be aware of how these projects like bus stops or footpaths affects the community and like well-being in a larger sense. So like, how are you helping the community by putting in a bus system? It's like you're allowing for people to go to work or to go to medical appointments, to go socialize. So very important things that help a community, especially those of like lower economic status or those with disabilities. It's like you're giving them the opportunity to go and get some education, and then they can, grow in the world and do better. So that's a really important thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. The why, like why we're even doing these things in the first place. We might come back to that a bit later. If anybody again in the audience has questions or commentary around how we could integrate social policy into our planning a bit better, feel free to put them in the Q&A. So you did a research project on bus stop accessibility. That was what you chose. Why did you choose that topic?
I think I chose it because that is what kind of the transport team at Beca were looking at with the council. So it was on their minds. It was really helpful to them for me to focus on it. And, and I think it was a nice thing to choose a topic that was on their mind, that was helpful, that I could, give a new perspective onto projects they were doing. Yeah.
And what did you learn about the variability of bus stops in Tauranga?
I feel like I knew about the wide range just from like seeing them out and about, but I think, seeing things like audits or things like that, that the council has done, it's like it becomes so prominent, like, oh, okay, like, most bus stops are just very low level, like hole in the ground, so it actually just highlighted how bad of an issue it is, of how many inaccessible bus stops there are. Because, yeah, in my mind, I was like, okay, an accessible bus stop has like a footpath connected to it and a hard stand area, and there's a whole lot more you could do, like seating, but we'll just leave it at like hard stand area and footpath. And many of them don't even have that. So yeah, I think I just learned more about how big of an issue it is.
Yeah. And so what do you think, or how do you think they could prioritize putting more of those accessibility features in? Do you have any ideas about, where they could start, or what they could do to make them better?
Yeah, I think there's always kind of the issue of how much money you have to spend on a project, but I think, yeah, prioritizing those basic things. So yeah, like connection to a footpath, making sure they can cross the road safely, or a hard stand area, and then if they want to in the future, they can build seating there or build a shelter, but they need that hard stand area first. So I think if they, there was a standard of those simple things like a hard stand area, then you can build off of that. But I think also there's so many features from other countries or even in Auckland that they're starting to put in, like talking buses and bus stops that could be integrated in the future, which I think would be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. So what about other parts of the bus system? So once you're on the bus, or even finding out information about buses, is there other aspects of a bus journey that would present barriers to disabled people that you think could be improved?
Yeah, I definitely think so. That's why my survey for my research project had very open-ended questions, just because I wanted to hear about everything. Even if it wasn't directly about a bus stop, I could still learn more about it. So I think specific things is really about like the information. So that's whether it's on the mobile app or the signage or maps or anything like that. It's not always, right. And so people with disabilities that may struggle with, like signs or information or things like that, they might be anxious to take the bus. It's great to have, correct information or live information about like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this bus is running late, because
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's a whole bunch of people who would really benefit from having that information. Even I know, some buses are like able to go lower than other buses. So if it was on a timetable, like, okay, now a bus that's more accessible is coming, so a person with a wheelchair who prefers that kind of bus could know, and then they could go at that time, so they're not stranded anywhere because a bus comes that's not the right kind of bus.
Yeah, that's interesting. So even though not all of the bus stops meet the gold standard for accessibility, or even the standard, and the buses are the same, telling people about that. So having more information on maps, or on the bus app or something that tells people what's at the bus stop and what kind of buses are coming and what features they have, it would help people make that decision, right? To know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think different kinds of information as well. You need to take into consideration many different types of disabilities. So
Yeah.
people who are blind, or people who are deaf, or people with low visions, like you've got to have information provided in many different ways. That's why I think those real-time information like signs that are starting to come into Tauranga are really good, because they do have that audio option so someone can hear it, and they also have, you know, the signs are designed for people with like low sight, so it's very visually like readable, and that also helps people with, say, autism or ADHD, or even children who
Yep.
may misinterpret signs.
Yep.
It's just really helpful for a bunch of different disabilities.
Yep. And what do you think we could do to prioritize in terms of, do you think talking with the community about where we could put these? Because like you say, it's a very engineering answer you gave us about not having, you can't have enough money to put things everywhere. That's kind of the whole point of engineering, really, trying to get the best you can, the most efficient investment. So do you think maybe if engineers weren't so scared of talking to people in the community, if we talked more or did more surveys or engagement with disabled people, then the community itself could help to prioritize what features could go where?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, you know, the council has some kind of rules about, say, those real-time like signs should go where there's more foot traffic at that bus stop. But then I've seen a real-time sign at a place with no hard stand and no seating, no shelter, just a pole in the ground, and then another pole with the live information. So I think, yeah, it's great to have information like where's the most foot traffic, but then it's also good to think about where our priority places, so like the hospital or like a rest home or things like that could benefit by having more accessible bus stops, or there might be a larger number of wheelchair users or people with disabilities visiting those
Sure.
locations.
Yeah, sure. So so understanding the demographics of the bus stop, not just the number of people who use it. Yeah, that's really good. So at the end of your internship, you presented your research to the Regional Transport Committee in Tauranga. How did that go?
Yeah, that went well. I think it was a really cool opportunity, and obviously they were all like, you know, transport people. They know this kind of information, so it wasn't like teaching a bunch of people new information. But I think it was good to kind of be like, I'm someone who is not in this sector, and I'm watching what you guys are doing, and I care. And here's my little bit of research, and I think you've got a huge issue, and I think there's a lot of people that care. So a lot of the disability services I reached out to, they really care. A lot of the people I talk to, they care. So I think for me, it was a good opportunity. And I think it just helps them kind of see, you know, other people care about this and they're watching what you guys do, because it impacts a whole lot of people.
Yeah, transport certainly does go across a lot of lives. Maybe we should have more interaction between social kind of sector and transport sector. Can you think of any ways it might be possible? Like this internship is one way, I guess. We weren't prescriptive about what kind of subject someone needed to be studying, but do you think, you know, is there social policy people or something that the transport sector should be talking to at like a regional level, maybe, to try and improve the way they invest in transport stuff?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's kind of like the councils have a kind of responsibility to have that communication with the disabled community and the services, and, you know, those kind of foundations that have like specific disabilities in mind and hear them out. So I think there's a responsibility there, but then there's also like, how do engineering companies directly communicate with the disabled community? And I think that's where it's like, maybe engineering companies should widen their kind of scope of what kind of people do they hire. Maybe they would want to hire someone like me, like a social work student, who can be that kind of liaison between like these community groups, these minorities, that kind of thing, and then bring that perspective in. So it wouldn't have to just be about disability. It could be about how could an engineering project be more culturally appropriate or inclusive or things like that. There's a whole lot of things that a social worker does, and I think this kind of internship is really along the lines of advocacy as a big like kind of values. I'm advocating for this group and a sector that, you know, is impacting them.
Yeah, that's really cool. So maybe more diversity within the profession itself, so that the transport profession isn't, I mean, it's already more diverse than it used to be, I think, but we're getting fewer and fewer, well, not fewer, but less of a dominance by people with an engineering background like me, and more people who come from a geography background, or maybe psychology or urban planning, but we don't really have much input from social policy and you know, art students and people with those different kinds of perspectives. So yeah, perhaps like you say, it's on the companies themselves to think about the benefits that going more broad in their recruitment would give to them. And you know, you telling your story is probably a really good part of that. Do you think there might have been people at Beca who were, you know, kind of pleasantly surprised at what you could contribute while you were there? Like, do you think, how do you think it went in terms of how you were received at somewhere like Beca?
Yeah, I think I thought I was received really well, and like especially by my team, they were really cool, just being like, this is, I've never thought about it like that way, or like, oh, it's really interesting talking to you about this, or like understanding, say, even kind of my story with illness and things like that. Or
Yep.
a lot of what I did was just kind of, I did all this research, I read these kind of reports, and I just was like, oh, so this report, they had a man who was blind and deaf try and take the bus, and this is how he did it. And you know, it's just like putting this research in the kind of like light and being like, here it is. And I know you guys don't probably have time to look at it, but it's a good thing to kind of highlight. So yeah, I think I was received really well, and everyone was really open to the ideas of what I was doing and really supportive.
That's really cool. And what did you learn about transport sector and transport planning while you were at Beca? Was there anything that surprised you, or that you learned about how transport projects happen?
Yeah, I guess I learned like everything about the transport sector. I don't feel like I knew anything, but yeah, I think it is kind of surprising, I guess, learning more about transport and how everyone kind of collaborates to get something done, and all the procedures, and you know, just things like that. So yeah, I think mainly it was interesting learning about how do the councils like collaborate to do something like a bus stop, like the Bay of Plenty Regional Council and the Tauranga City Council, and how do they then, like, you know, do the bus system and bus stops and that kind of collaboration, and then how does like the company like Beca come in, and yeah.
And how well do you think that works? So I remember you saying to me early on in your internship that the council has really good guidelines for what should happen, what should be at a bus stop, but you didn't find any bus stops that met those guidelines. So for example, there was no bus stops in Tauranga that have tactile paving for blind people, for example. Do you think that the planning, the way that it's planned and delivered with the regional council doing the planning and the city council doing the infrastructure, do you think it could be improved in some way? How would you do it if you were designing how they invested in bus stops? Do you think you would do it differently than it's done now?
Yeah, I think there's a disconnect between the kind of bus services the regional council does and the kind of infrastructure that the city council does. Yeah, like you said, I found the guidelines, and they're quite old. I think they were like 2010 or something, and they had really great ideas of other ones that I'd found in research. So yeah, things like, well, the bus stop should have tactiles and they should be in this formation. But then looking at the bus stops in Tauranga, none of them have those tactiles. And then there's even more things like you need to consider lighting and consider things, yeah, like crossing the street and what kind of things are available there, and yeah, consider safety and hazards in the way, or street furniture. Like there's a lot of things, and you can have a perfect bus stop, and I think around the town, like in the city, there's more bus stops that are like reaching those standards, but there's a whole bunch that are kind of, you know, missed out. And I don't think you can blame it on a money thing, because that guidelines been out for so long. I think it can be to a degree you don't have enough money to do that, but I think it's about planning ahead, and I think it's about prioritizing things like that. So even my idea of, well, if you first put in a hard stand area, then maybe after a few years you get more money, then you could put seating there in a shelter. So I don't know. I think, yeah, it is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe part of it goes back to what you said earlier about understanding why these things are really important. So for someone like you, for example, if it didn't have a seat and you're at a stage in your life where it's painful to stand up for too long, if we had more stories like that, or more understanding from communities about why they need this infrastructure, and if those stories informed the planning rather than, at the moment we've just got the guideline and all the bus stops, and there's not really much understanding of the urgency, I guess, of that challenge, and the impact it could have on people's lives. So maybe we could measure, bus patronage in a different way, like you're talking about earlier, not just people getting places, but who's getting somewhere and how does it affect their well-being. Maybe we need more storytellers and social policy kind of people to make those connections for us, because if it's just about infrastructure planning, then we don't really get any of that, do we?
Yeah, it's very impersonal. And I mean, I spoke to someone from the council about upgrading bus stops, and I said, well, curb height is important. And he said, oh, curb height, why is that important? And I was like, okay, well, like someone using the bus with the wheelchair, the bus is going to come along, and if the curb is too low, then the ramp is on a angle that's too steep, and then someone with a wheelchair can the whole wheelchair can fall over and they can get hurt. So that's why curb height is important. But I guess if you're just reading a guideline, you're like, curb height, it needs to be this many centimeters or something. You don't really think about it. But for someone with a wheelchair, it's dangerous and it's unsafe to get out on a place that doesn't have the right curb height. That's why I think temporary bus stops are often an issue, because it can often be that there's no curb and there's no safe way for a passenger with a wheelchair to get off.
Yeah, I think understanding more of that why is really cool, which is why your research is going to be so good, and we're going to share a summary report of Alice's work in our next roundabout newsletter. So what have you learned about society and people and social work in your degree that you think engineers and planners would benefit from knowing?
Yeah, I think the main thing is thinking about well-being and that wider kind of well-being and that influence. So there's a good theory we always talk about. You've got like a circle, and you've got your small circle, which is like you, and then your family, and it's bigger. It's like your doctors, your teachers, and then it goes out to like your environment and policies and your culture. And so things like transport is a way of that wider influence and helping with the well-being. So like I said, it's a way for people to access education or healthcare or just socializing. So it has a big impact on people's well-being, and especially for someone who is disabled, it's like you are more likely to be of lower income, so less likely to be able to purchase a car, especially an accessible like van or something. And then it's like you need to go to places like medical appointments more often, and it's more important to go to things like support groups to socialize and have that kind of experience. So I think there's a really big need to make sure that buses are accessible, because most people with disabilities are very reliant on buses to be that transport, and if they're not accessible, then you're really isolating this whole group and kind of lowering their like level of like quality of life. So it has a really big impact at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So what you were saying earlier about maybe using more than just the number of people using a bus stop. So you might want to put them accessible features, prioritize them at hospitals or rest homes or places where there are a lot of disabled people who live. So maybe we could think about, instead of maximizing the number of people, we could maximize well-being, because people in those communities have got a lot more to gain from having a hard stand that they can use, rather than people in a wealthier area where there are fewer disabled people and they don't need the hard stand as much, right? So even though there might be more people using that bus, that's not necessarily the best place to put it. But engineers really like numbers and metrics, so I think if we could prioritize infrastructure based on maximizing well-being, then all of a sudden you're going to have low-income people and disabled people become a lot more important factor in that process.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think at the moment we don't really know, like, sounds like you learn more about those demographics and society stuff, right? So do you learn about deprivation and things like that, and how to find out that information in your degree?
So
yeah.
I do specific papers about social policy, and we look really in depth in poverty, and it's really heartbreaking. It's like, if you're born into poverty, you're gonna, like, statistically stay there, and if you're born and your parents are on a benefit, it's like you're more likely to be lower income for the rest of your life and have less education and less, like, paying job. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
less opportunities.
it affects you a lot. So something like transport is a way to get someone educated or get a job and get someone out of that situation. So that's why it's really important to target areas of lower income, because you are basically equipping people to be able to live. But then that's also on the reliability of buses.
Yeah, absolutely.
Has to be
Got to be
reliable.
a good bus system. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
There's research project coming out that we did last year on transport, disabled people's experiences of transport, and it's not enough for the system to be accessible if it's a stupid system. There's no point having a hard stand for a bus that never shows up. Okay, cool. So do you think you would ever consider a career in transport, or any of your fellow students, or is it something that's not really on the horizon at the moment for a general kind of social policy student?
Yeah, I think I would now, because of my experience, but I think that again depends on companies, opening those doors, because
Yeah.
it's not really open at the moment, unless I had that engineering experience. So I hope that there's kind of progression in that area. I think transport is something talked about in more like psychology, or from social work you can go and do like policy advising, and maybe that's something you could do at the ministry. But not in an engineering company or a transport company. I don't think that's really there, and it's not available yet.
Yeah, that's right. We've got a wee way to go to change some of the language of those graduate recruitment advertisements, where they're all about having an engineering degree or similar or something like that, aren't they? It's really great and interesting. We've gonna have talk about some of these questions shortly, but is there anything else you'd like to talk about related to transport or your experience at Beca? Shout out to the Beca people. Were they nice to you?
Yeah, shout out to them. And I will say that also in my internship I was able to talk to a lot of other kind of sectors in Beca, so even like fire safety or architects, things like that. So I was really grateful for the opportunity to kind of branch out and put myself out there and kind of share about it. And I did some other projects that were like access public buildings, which also is very important, like from car parks or footpaths or from bus stops to get to these places. So yeah,
cool. Okay, great. So we're going to have some questions and answers from the audience. Again, if you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to type them in. So the first one is, what do you think is the most important feature or features to the most basic bus stop? So if there's just a pole and a ground, I think you might have mentioned perhaps a hard stand, but what do you think's the most important one, or would it vary depending on where it is?
I think, to be honest, I think it's a footpath, because it's even if the footpath can kind of act as a hard stand area in some spaces, but it's just like, how does someone even with a pram or with a walker or someone on crutches, get to a bus stop when it's just a bunch of driveways or it's just all like grass? And what happens when someone's waiting for the bus stop and it's a storm or it's raining, they're just standing in the mud? So
Yeah,
I think, I'm going to say footpaths.
Footpath's really interesting because it also needs to be maintained, right? Because if the crossfall is not very good, or if it's got lots of cracks and tree roots coming up through it, then it might not be that usable for everybody, not all in the same way. So making sure that the footpath is there and that the footpath meets the council's footpath standards would be good, right?
Yeah. I also think there's like often footpaths with many different types of concrete. So someone who's patches can get confused, and it's also just really bumpy. I think I know in the Mount here they have like that low kind of beach grass that goes over the footpaths, and then they become really narrow.
So clearing all that vegetation is really important. So we've got a comment here from someone from Auckland Transport. I'll just read it out to you and see what you think. So they say, hi, I worked on some bus stop designs some time ago where required locations were pre-selected by others. However, making access connections, avoiding conflicts with vehicle crossings, intersections, trees, service obstructions, and importantly, providing markings and signs were more challenging. Needed meticulous effort for these small jobs. So what do you say about that? I think, it came to mind for me is maybe that the job, some of these jobs might seem small to engineers, but they have a big impact.
I think a lot of that is, consistency. So in a city, you want that consistency with good quality footpaths, and then, you've got signage and how does the intersections work, and because otherwise you are looking at, I want to put in an accessible bus stop, and then you think, okay, how do you get here? And then you find all these problems like the footpaths or the crossings or the intersection. So I think it's a really hard task to continue that kind of consistency, but I think that is the best kind of way to achieve an accessible journey, and that's kind of what's mentioned in those guidelines. So like consistent footpaths and concrete and all those things. But I definitely understand the issue, and it's definitely tough.
Yeah, it is. I think the accessible journey is something we haven't talked about until just then, but the idea that a journey needs every component so that somebody can make that journey, and for a disabled person it's even more crucial that every component is accessible because they don't necessarily have the energy or ability to go a longer way or to go a different route or to just take the car or all the other options that a lot of other people have. So and in transport we don't have anybody whose job it is to look at the accessible journey. Maybe we should employ social work people to have a kind of overarching role, try and connect the dots. Maybe we need more connectors in the transport system. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And like one of the projects I did was with the DHB and like with the access to their building site, but they employ social workers there. So I wondered if maybe they thought about utilizing their social workers in a way of asking, hey, let's look at advocating for people with disabilities that use this kind of this building. So I do think there is room for more advocating or just more learning on like for people who are planners and engineers. I know there's some like learning in university for like the Treaty of Waitangi, but what about a paper on disabilities?
Yeah, for sure. One time I was doing a survey with a friend of mine, Jerry, who worked at CCS Disability Action. She uses a wheelchair, and we were just counting people at the hospital coming to different entrances. And people kept asking us how to get transport. Like they were asking us, where's the shuttle? Where's the car park? I'm lost. And we're like, wow, this is a bigger problem than we realized. There's no one's kind of job at the hospital to help people get around. And in fact, that's what the hospital facilities manager said when we talked to him about it. He's like, oh, transport's not our core business. And I was like, well, maybe not your core business, but it's pretty important. People can get maybe more connected kind of people. I'm sure the social work people in hospital have transport conversations all the time. How do people get places, and what do you do if the bus doesn't show up, and that kind of thing. Yeah, it's really complex. There's a question here about, I'll just read it out. In research, did you look into other countries around the world that have standards or guidelines that are more receptive and accommodating of disabled people in their public transport? And possibly can we adapt some of the processes they're applying? So that's one part of the question. Did you find some good stuff from overseas? And the next question is, how receptive do you think regional council is in applying your knowledge and your research to either revise their guidelines or to change the way they prioritise infrastructure?
So I definitely looked at other countries, not so in depth. I wanted to really focus on New Zealand, but I mean, I had chats with transport team members from Australia, Beca, and what they're doing and their kind of accessibility, which was really interesting. And then other countries like UK have all this talking trains and buses and bus stops, so I think that's a really important kind of future that I want to see happen. I think other countries also have a lot of different kinds of transport. So like in Tauranga, we don't have a train service for like people to go on. We don't have trams. We only have buses. So, there's a whole lot of other types of transport I think that my research could go into, especially looking at other countries, what they do. But I think a lot of countries have very interesting signage that's very helpful, like those signs. Yeah.
And how did the regional council take your research? Did they say anything about what they might do with it?
Interesting question. I think that they feel that they are doing a very good job for the disabled community because they do like free bus fares, and I think that is a good thing. But it is kind of like, okay, free bus fares are great, but what if someone can't get to their bus stop? Or what if it's dangerous? What about all these accidents of people with wheelchairs trying to cross the road to get to a bus stop? So I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's like they're not there yet. Like, I think that happens quite a lot with disability interventions in transport, kind of pat themselves on the back for something and then forget about it again for a while. And the barriers are everywhere, and the problems have such a big impact on people's lives. I think we really need to keep reminding them, and we have to keep reminding them because they don't represent the community, right? There aren't that many disabled people who are counsellors either. So that problem of representation is there as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they will do anything. I know that they're looking at putting out new guidelines, but I said that I think your guidelines are great. You just don't follow them. So why put in the time to make new guidelines? It's like, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think you've learned a lot about how transport planning actually happens in a really short time. I think you've done a great job, Alice. I think your report's excellent, and I'll look forward to sharing it with our members through our Roundabout newsletter, and I'll certainly look forward to staying in touch with you and watching you progress through your career. I think you've got a great future ahead of you, and I think the transport profession would be lucky to have you. So I certainly encourage all transport firms to think more broadly about the criteria for graduates, especially in recruitment, because there are a lot of smart people out there who've got a lot to offer. And I think our transport outcomes would be a lot better if we were more diverse ourselves. So thank you very much. Thank you for being our first student intern, and thank you for coming along to this conversation with me. And we'll leave it there for today. And this conversation will be hosted on the Engineering New Zealand YouTube channel before too long, so you can share it with all your friends, and we'll look forward to the next conversation, which will be in the second Monday of May. So thanks very much, Alice.
Thank you.
Wish you all the best for your studies. Thank you. Bye, everyone.